Lockie, can you turn the video off unless you're actually speaking? Okay, we are live. London BitDev Socratic Seminar on Bitcoin Privacy with Adam Gibson. This is a live call on Jitsi. We are streaming on YouTube, so bear that in mind.
Hello, YouTube.
Let me turn that off. So yeah, we're using Jitsi. Thanks a lot to Jeff from Fullmo for helping us set this up. For those who don't know, Jitsi is open source. It doesn't collect your data, and it was surprisingly easy to get this set up. So let's hope there's no problems today, and we can show how wonderful.
You're jinxing us, Michael.
Okay, let's moderate our expectations. But so far, so good. Okay. So yeah, this is London BitDevs. You can follow us on Twitter, LDN Bitcoin Devs. We have a YouTube channel with a bunch of really good presentations from the last couple of years. Adam Gibson's talked about Schnorr. Chris Belcher's had a couple of presentations on Join Market, and Shaw's Provost and John Newbury and all sorts. So check out the YouTube channel. We're also looking for future speakers. So if you're a Bitcoin developer or a Lightning developer, and you're interested in speaking about work you've been doing or a particular topic, get in touch. We can do a presentation, or we can do a Socratic seminar like today. I'll talk a bit about Socratic seminars. I think pretty much everyone knows what a Socratic seminar is now. It originated at BitDevs in New York. It's basically just a discussion, normally with an agenda that the organizers at BitDevs put together. And you discuss all the various different resources on that agenda, and the emphasis is on participation and interaction. So this isn't supposed to be a presentation from Adam today. This is supposed to be a discussion, and we're trying to get as many people who are on the call involved in that discussion as possible. For resources on doing Socratic seminars, whether they be online or in person, check out bitdevs.org. Today, we will be having questions. We'll see how this goes. If everyone's talking over each other, we might try and do hands up, and then I'll say which person can speak. We'll see how it goes. Okay. So yeah, introductions. Adam Gibson, I think everyone will know, works on Join Market and a bunch of Bitcoin privacy projects. And we've got a number of other people on the call, including Max Hillebrand and OpenNoms. We normally start the Socratic by doing introductions. Obviously, you don't have to give your real name if you don't want. And also, if you don't want to do an introduction, that's also fine. But just so that we know who's on the call, anybody who's willing to introduce yourself, introduce yourself. I'm hearing an echo, so I think someone's got a YouTube video on. Maybe everyone can mute unless
I think it's okay now.
Okay, good. So yeah, perhaps you can start off, Adam. Introduce yourself. Obviously, your level of expertise with Bitcoin privacy is pretty high, but other people can also describe what their level of understanding is and what interests and what people are working on, etc. So we'll start off with Adam, and we'll go through anybody else on the call who wants to introduce themselves.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Adam Gibson. I'm known on the internet as Waxwing and Adam ISZ on GitHub, just in case you're trying to figure out the connections there. Most of my work is on Join Market, which I think most people know here is a Coinjoin implementation. But I also do other things, as Michael's already mentioned. Probably no point in just going through details. I also do a little bit of work on Lightning, although I haven't done for a while. All right, next one.
Yeah. So if you can do hands, or I'll just okay. Lockie would like to speak. So it's the first time I've been using this software, so there's going to be a few teething problems. I can't actually see Lockie.
Yeah, cool. So
maybe
so good.
Oh, Lockie, go for it.
Can
You can turn the video on when you're speaking, but if you're not speaking, keep the video and the audio off. But when you are speaking, turn them both on, unless you don't want to turn the video on. Obviously, it's optional. Go for it.
Cool. Yeah. Hi, my name's Lockie McWilliam. I'm a cybersecurity expert. Been working for the big bad banks for many, many years. And I'm also a passionate Bitcoiner. Have been lurking on the scene for quite a few years now. And yes, the last couple of years, I've really started upping the game and trying to get more involved. So thanks for organizing this, Michael.
Awesome, no problem. Thanks for that, Lockie. Just very quickly, what's your understanding on Bitcoin privacy? Beginner, intermediate, advanced?
I would say intermediate, intermediate to advanced. I know I have done quite a bit with it in terms of using it and stuff like that. So yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Lockie. Who wants to go next? I'm not seeing any hands. So maybe open noms next. Or Max, go for it, Max.
Okay. So I'm Max Hillebrand. Been using free and open source software for a while now, and always looking to contribute back wherever I can. Currently, mainly focusing on Wasserwood and doing a lot of testing here and review of the product, as well as more research on future Coinjoin magic that we can build. And also been testing the Payjoin implementation for P2EP and Wasabi for quite some time. I love drawing market too, so anything that's good for privacy.
Very cool. Thanks, Max. Maybe Open Noms can go next.
Yeah. Hey. I'm running under the pseudonym OpenNums. I'm basically a Bitcoin and Lightning enthusiast, working usually on the Raspberry project and everything connected to it. Also try to implement connected in connection to Bitcoin privacy. I've implemented the join market kind of installation script and two Raspberry and trying to work on a bit of a terminal-based GUI as well, and then just a couple of bits and bobs trying to contribute as much as possible. I'm on the road of learning programming from Bash and Python, so there is a lot to do there. Very enthusiastic about Bitcoin privacy. I've used most of all the three major Coinjoin implementations and trying to combine them together with Lightning as well. So very curious what we'll be speaking about today.
Very cool. Thanks, Open Noms. Maybe Pierre next, if Pierre can hear me. Do you want to do an introduction?
So, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Go for it,
great.
Pierre.
Hi, I'm Pierre. I'm mostly working on Lightning ATM to build for your own and fully open source, and I try to learn as much as possible about Bitcoin. I'm thinking I'm an intermediate in Bitcoin privacy. I know how the fundamentals works, but I haven't much experience in programming Coinjoin or doing some stuff with Coinjoin or Payjoin. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Thanks, Pierre. El Buddha, do you want to do an intro? Okay, I don't think I can hear you, El Buddha. So I'll move on to someone else. Nothing much. Do you want to do an intro? You don't have to.
Sure, although I was hearing Lucas, so...
I also could hear him.
Oh, you could hear El Buddha, did you say?
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Maybe continue then, El Buddha. I can't hear you for some reason. Okay, we'll try Elbidder after Nothing Much. If you want to do an introduction, Nothing Much, go for it.
Sure. So I'm Yuval, or Nothing Much. I don't know my Twitter handle because it's randomly generated. And I guess I'm slightly obsessive about Bitcoin privacy. I think it's like the most important thing and the most broken thing about Bitcoin. And been involved with like Wasabi people recently, trying to work on the next iteration of the protocol.
Okay, very cool. Anybody else, or should we start? Should we try Elbidder again? According to me, he's muted, which is fine. Okay, we'll get started.
Lucas, can you unmute yourself? His name's Lucas. But yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. I'm not sure why, but Michael can't. But go ahead and do your intro, please. Thank you. Have we lost Michael?
No, I'm still here, but I can't hear anybody.
Okay, that's so weird.
I can't hear Elbidder, so I was just staying quiet.
Maybe you have some like setting you've accidentally clicked where you've muted him or something, because I think we can all hear him.
No.
Or maybe reload your browser. Max is saying maybe reload your browser.
I can't do that because then I lose control of the call.
Don't worry then.
Okay, we'll get started. I think that's everyone who's on the call. So for the benefit of the beginners who are perhaps watching on YouTube, or maybe some of the beginners / intermediates on the call, we'll just start discussing the basic concepts first. But it will get advanced technically later on. Obviously, we've got a bunch of developers who are working on privacy tech on the call. So I thought, first off, what are the problems with Bitcoin privacy? What are we worried about when we make a Bitcoin transaction in terms of privacy leakage? Anyone want to go? Maybe Lockie? No, Lockie.
Hey, sorry. I just came back on. I kind of missed that the last few minutes.
Oh, that's fine. Maybe Max.
Yeah. So Satoshi wrote already in the white paper, right, that the privacy is based on pseudonymous identities. Of basically Bitcoin addresses in the very general sense. So what we want to achieve is to de-link these pseudonymous identities so that one user having several of these is not tied together and not revealed in a cluster. Of course, one of the biggest or easiest ways to get de-anonymized like this is by reusing addresses, right? Because then several times you interact with the network, it is clear that this is the same pseudonymous identity. But even if you don't reuse addresses, there are certain ways that you can transact Bitcoin that still reveal common ownership of coins and addresses of a specific user. And these are basically heuristics, right? So there's something like the common input ownership heuristic, but basically all these de-anonymization techniques rely on the fact that they can link different pseudonymous identities to the same cluster.
I would expand a bit further that this is not just at the level of the transaction structure. I mean, all transactions are completely transparent because that's how everybody can validate. But also all of the other underlying infrastructure, like the network level privacy, is full of concerns. There's no encryption in the peer-to-peer protocol. So there's many facets to this, not just the transaction structure.
Very good. Anyone else want to add anything? So OpenNums. Go for OpenNums.
Yes, well, I mean, there are a couple different aspects of just, there are things which are recorded on the blockchain, obviously, and then, preserved forever and can be analyzed. But also there is metadata which can be related to the network. So IP address is recorded together with the transactions in some databases which is outside of the blockchain. There could be timing analysis. There could be trying to locate the source of the transactions as well. Also, there are databases which are different from the blockchain, but then listing the transactions like big exchanges or anything running with KYC, which are basically connecting the transactions and withdrawals with the passport and personal data of the users. I think there must be a couple of other things which we need to be aware of, but that's one I can add.
Very good. Anybody else? Or should we move on? Okay, I'm not. So what's a Coinjoin? What is the problem that Coinjoin is attempting to solve? Matt, Leo, okay, let's go for the beginner intermediates first. Does Lockie want to say anything? Pierre, let's go for Pierre.
I think Loki want to speak. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, go for it, Lockie.
Yeah. Okay. So Coinjoin, I guess, is I guess joining multiple transactions. So multiple inputs, creating a certain number of outputs.
Cool. Pierre?
So I think the main problem is the connection between outputs. So I mostly do the reference to a $20 cash bill. If you want to buy something from for $5 and you give this person $20 cash bill, you get 15 back. And so it's mostly known that the 15 euro, $50 are from the sender of the first payment, and so you can correlate the amount spent and the amount received back, because yeah, this is the most common transaction type where you pay one output or several output and to one address and get one and creates two new outputs, one for the receiver and one as a change output.
Okay, cool. Anybody else? We'll go with Max then.
Yeah, so I think the main.
Sorry, just one thing, Max. Just one thing, Max. If you want to, you can turn the sound and the video on when you speak. You don't have to, but I think some people are happy with the video on. So if you do want to put the video on when you speak, just for the YouTube, you can. Sorry, Max. Continue.
Yeah, so the idea with Coinjoin is to literally join your coins, right? So this is a way where multiple users consolidate several of their coins in one transaction. The important idea is to break the common input ownership heuristic, right? That's one part of it. That we can no longer assume that all the inputs of a transaction belong to one entity, as would be the case with, for example, transaction batching, right? Where one entity does several payments in one transaction rather than in many. It's a scalability improvement. But then a further privacy tool that or result that we want to get with this tool is that the outputs being created are no longer tied to the inputs created. So that the pseudonymous identities of the input user are no longer linked to those of the output users, basically to break the link between input and output.
Very cool. Nothing much. Go for it.
So just one last thing is that unlike mixing services, which were introduced prior to that, Coinjoin is also completely trustless. It relies on the fact that every input requires a signature that authorizes the entire transaction. So unless all the participants agree about where the funds end up at the end, there's no possibility of theft.
Okay. OpenNums?
Yes, I just would like to add that another thing we are exposing in transactions is not only that the actual UTXOs or the actual Bitcoin can tie to be an entity, tied to an entity, but also the payment history and the future payments at that from that point when the inputs are tied to someone. So with employing a Coinjoin, what we can do is break the UTXO, the piece of Bitcoin, from its history in the past. And also, if we're paying through a Coinjoin or paying after a Coinjoin and not merging with previously tied changes together, then we can decouple from the future history of the coins as well.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next question, which is, what are the challenges when setting up a Coinjoin? Anybody want to take that question? Nothing much?
So there is fundamentally a coordination problem between the different participants. If you want to participate in a Coinjoin, you have to find other Bitcoin users who are willing to collaborate with you to construct this transaction. There are privacy considerations in whatever protocol you use. So when you actually communicate with those other parties to this transaction, you generally will disclose more information if you do it naively. So it's both a coordination problem, finding counterparties, and it requires additional layers of privacy to actually go through that whole process in a way that maintains the benefits of a Coinjoin from the blockchain layer perspective.
Thank you. Max?
Yes, good points, nothing much. And I would add that, we already spoke about the non-custodial aspect that nobody can steal, and about the privacy aspect that none of the participants can spy on each other. And I think one important nuance that is very difficult to do in the implementation is denial of service protection, right? Especially because we work with pseudonymous identities here. It might be very easy for an attacker to do a civil attack or to break the protocol at a specific time. So to simply delay it or make the service unusable. And denial of service is a very nuanced thing that we might not even have seen working properly in production yet.
Thank you, Max. Anybody else have any thoughts on the challenges of setting up Coinjoins or the different approaches to setting up Coinjoins? No? OpenNums, do you want to say anything? Oh, no, wait, yeah, OpenNums, go for it, OpenNums.
Right, what came to my mind is that we can speak about how to construct this transaction. So these participants come together, but then there must be a coordinator who actually puts together all the signature, all the inputs, and all the signatures, and then all the outputs as well. And that can be like a central entity, like in the case of Wasabi or Whirlpool, or can be and decentralized in terms of an one-off entity who is acting as the taker in the joint markets model.
Okay, thanks, Abnums. Okay, so let's move on to the subject of today. So Payjoin. We'll start with some of the beginners and intermediates who want to try and explain what a Payjoin is, and then we'll finally bring Adam in, who's been waiting very patiently during this time. Anybody want to explain what a Payjoin is? I'm not seeing any hands. Pierre, go for it.
So if I try to stick with the cash example, same as before. I want to buy something for $5, and I give the person, the seller, $20. The seller will give me $5, and I give him 20 and $5, and he give me some cash back. So on a perspective of the blockchain, outsiders can't decide which input or which cash comes from me and which comes from the seller. I'm not sure if I understand it correctly, but mainly the receiver of the payment gives some money to the buyer and receives mostly more back. So it's just to decorrelate the first cash.
Okay, we'll go open nums and we'll go Max after open nums. Go for it, open nums.
It's just, I think it's mostly correct what you have described here. It's just, I think it's better to think of it as less steps. So before the buyer would pay, the seller would offer him some extra money to be included in that payment. So let's say they just put it on the table. So the seller puts their product they want to sell on the table, and they also put another $20 on the table. So the payer will pay the price of the product plus $20. So then his change will be right. Did I confuse myself? I think
maybe Max.
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Okay, no, it's fine. Max.
Yeah, so again, what do we want to try to break on the heuristic side? First is, of course, the common input ownership heuristic again, right? Because now not only the sender provides an input, but also the receiver provides an input. So that's very nice. And the cool thing is that this heuristic is now weakened, not just for the Payjoin transactions, but for every coin consolidation transaction. Right? Because now every transaction with more than one input might be a Payjoin. And thus the common input heuristic, input ownership heuristic does not hold up as often as it used to. And that is a huge win here already. Another point is the actual economic value transacted. So if we take the previous example, Alice wants to pay for the pizza with 1 Bitcoin, and Bob has 0.5 Bitcoin that he adds to this transaction. Then all of a sudden Alice gets her change back, for example, 2 Bitcoin, but the output that belongs to Bob not only has the 1 Bitcoin transaction for the pizza, but also the 0.5 Bitcoin additionally from Bob. So this output is 1.5, although the economic value transacted was actually 1 Bitcoin. So this is obfuscated as well.
Okay. Anybody else? Otherwise, we'll get Adam in. I'm not seeing any hands. Okay, so Adam, tell us the best explanation for what a Payjoin is. If you're still there.
Right. Yeah, I'm here. I'm listening. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of interesting, isn't it? When you try to make the analogies with cash work, they like that. This is a good example where it doesn't really work too well, I think, because almost because the nature of cash is it is more fungible, kind of in its nature, than Bitcoin with these UTXO objects, which are, or TXO objects even, which kind of like have a name on them. Anyway, let's not get too bogged down in analogies that don't really work particularly well. So Payjoin, I think Max was the last one to speak. It gave a pretty clear description of the motivation there. So basically, we want a few things from we want coin joins that have the effect of breaking common input ownership heuristic, and we want as many we want them to be steganographic, because steganographic means that you are sort of, so to speak, hiding in the crowd. You're doing it in a way where your transaction doesn't really look very different from, or different at all from, ordinary payment transactions. So you're getting the coin join effect, but you're not making it obvious that you're creating the coin join effect, which, as Max I think already said, creates a very strong additional privacy boost to effectively the whole network, because it makes blockchain analysis less effective. There's been some kind of at a high level, there's been some kind of discussion recently about what is really the purpose of Payjoin, and I think when I wrote a blog post about it, almost the last sentence I wrote was something like, "Oh, basically this is the next nail in the coffin, or the final nail in the coffin of blockchain analysis." I mean, that's the dream of it. I think is that it makes blockchain analysis horribly ineffective. So currently we have a situation with coin joins with equal-sized outputs, which have a tremendous benefit in delinking those outputs from the inputs, but they have a significant effect. But the problem is, currently, as we understand it, and this is a hot topic that nobody's really 100% sure about, as we understand it, blockchain analyst firms are kind of, they're either just marking those transactions as mixes and putting them to one side of their analysis, or they're doing some kind of crude percentage-based taint kind of analysis where they say, "Oh, these coins are 20% connected," But in either case, they can see on the blockchain that these coin joins are happening. And what we're trying to do with Payjoin is to trade off, on the one hand, having small anonymity sets per transaction, because we're talking about two-party coin joins. And that's intrinsic to the fact that a transaction is two-party. Now, a transaction doesn't have to be two-party. I suppose I could pay three people, so we could get more complicated with this. But for now, we're just sticking with the two-party case. So it's intrinsically a small coin join with a couple of people in it. It's also clearly not as powerful as using exactly the same output size, which is intrinsically indistinguishable. This is not an intrinsically indistinguishable situation. If somebody looks at a Payjoin, they might be able to figure something out. Well, we'll get into that later, but that's generally that's giving you that 1,000-foot view of what the motivation is. There's other aspects, but I think the conversation will get more complicated later. So let's start with the basics. Yeah. And to me, what I want to do, if this is okay with you, Michael, for the next, what time is it? Yeah, it's pretty late already, actually. For the next 20 minutes, or I want to keep this fairly brief, is go through the history of Payjoin as an idea. Does that make sense? Yeah,
absolutely. Sounds good.
By the way, as well as interrupting, I'm happy for people to interrupt. Just unmute yourself. But you can also, don't forget, use the chat. There is a chat window. If you haven't activated, you can toggle it on in the bottom left corner. So it's always possible to have a side conversation in chat. Don't forget. But yeah, feel free to interrupt. So I'm now going to do the advanced technical thing and try to share my screen, guys. So I would like to be told, if you don't, the first thing you're supposed to see is a Firefox window with the what's it called, the pastebin window. So if you don't see a Firefox window with pastebin in it now, then tell me. Well,
I see it, Adam.
Magic.
Yeah. Okay, right, great. So I'm just going to probably just stick with this window for the next 15-20 minutes at least, maybe the rest of the call. I don't know. So this paste bin was something I was just like trying to write down in sequence all the things I remember about Payjoin, and I've got all those like links open in my browser. Obviously, you can go. I will update the paste bin later after the event. If anyone finds it interesting, they can just go through these one by one. All right, so earlier descriptions. Now, before anyone actually used the word Payjoin, obviously Coinjoin itself as a concept was first expounded, so to speak, in 2013 by Greg Maxwell. But as should always be noted, Coinjoin is not an invention of, well, let's say it's not an innovation in Bitcoin of Greg Maxwell in 2013. It always existed from the start as, in principle, something people could do. In fact, he mentioned it before 2013. I think he called it "I tain't rich." This is way back in the annals of Bitcoin history. So there's Coinjoin itself, which is it's there from the beginning. And Payjoin is really just a variant of that central idea that when you create a transaction, it doesn't have to be just your inputs. And the strong power behind that idea is, as nothing much explained earlier, this very crucial issue that at least with standard SIG hash flags, if you sign a Bitcoin transaction with your key on one of the inputs, you're signing the whole of the transaction, therefore kind of fixing that signing to the specific set of outputs. Therefore, you don't take any risk in signing one of the inputs to a transaction and having someone else sign another input to the transaction. You still can make sure that you get the money you expect to get. Consequently, there are various different models you could imagine for Coinjoin, and this particular one was not taken very seriously by many people, including myself, because we thought it's kind of a bit of a pain for a payer to coordinate with a receiver instead of the usual model of Bitcoin, which is a payer prepares the transaction on their own and doesn't even have to talk to the receiver. One interesting detail is that since Lightning has become quite a big thing in the last couple of years, it also has an interactive model of payment. Actually, there's new technology which kind of gets around that, but let's just say Lightning generally involves an exchange of messages between sender and receiver. And it may be that subtly that influenced the thinking of the people, including myself, at a meeting in London in 2018, where we discussed possible ways to make Coinjoin more widely used. Now, the first link, I'm just highlighting it here, should be here. This was one of the first things that came out of that that meeting in London. And at the time, Blockstream put out an article. It was actually Matthew Hayward who was at the meeting talking about pay to endpoint. Okay, so pay to endpoint, I at the time myself thought was a poor name. I thought Payjoin would be a better name, and that debate still exists, but it's not a very interesting debate about names. Who cares, right? So if you see pay to endpoint or P2EP and you see Payjoin, think of it as basically the same thing, even if you could argue that. Let's just say it's the same thing because it's not interesting to argue about. So he wrote a long blog post here. It's pretty good. He gives all the basic principles. So if you want to read through that, please do. Towards the end, he talks about some interesting questions around protecting against potential privacy attacks. Because this is still an interactive protocol, even if it's only two-party, there could be scenarios where the sender could be effectively trying to steal privacy from the receiver by, for example, getting lots of information about their UTXOs. So there's some discussion of that there, and some discussion of some pretty high-tech ideas about how to solve it. But I'm going to put that to one side because it's, you'll see the nuances as we go on. So that was kind of one of the first explanations of the concept. And I think actually technically, NoPara, who was also at the meeting with me, and we were discussing this endlessly at the time, put out a blog post here on Medium. And he's also talking about, because he was very interested in this idea of how can we prevent prevent senders kind of stealing privacy from receivers. We were looking at zero knowledge proofs and so on. So he talks a bit about that, and as usually, he's got cartoon characters. And he's always got some interesting pictures in his blog post, unlike me, because I wrote this very dense, wordy blog post instead. But I actually think it's one of my better blog posts, even though it doesn't look very pretty. It does go through some nice pretty easy to understand examples that lead you into Payjoin. So, for example, asking the question, hiding in a much bigger crowd. How could we do a Coinjoin but make it look like an ordinary transaction? It's really like the story I'm trying to tell here. And then I draw examples like here where Alice and Bob do a Coinjoin where they both put in 0.05 and they both get out 0.05. That's kind of stupid, right? There's no real transactions, right? There's no real payment transactions that look like that. So that's a failure. And then I talked about how could you make a Coinjoin where, this looks a bit more like a normal payment, right? Because it has two outputs, right? And normal payments have a payment output and they have a change output and they have some inputs. It could be 1, 2, 3, 4, who knows, right? And the problem with this kind of thing is less obvious, but it's very revealing when you understand the problem with this is that 0.1 plus 0.01 plus 0.04 adds up to 0.05. 0.03 plus 0.03 add up to 0.06. Let me stop for a moment. Can anybody not see the numbers that I'm highlighting?
It's good to me.
Okay. Yeah. So that isn't slightly unobvious, but on reflection, obvious, correct? That actually a subset of the inputs, two of them, add up to one of the outputs, and a subset of the other, the remaining subset of the inputs adds up to the other output. So we call this like subset sum analysis, crudely, basically separating the inputs and outputs into different subsets and seeing that they match up is a dead giveaway. It's not 100% certain, but it's pretty much a dead giveaway that what's happening there is a mixing event where two parties are not paying each other. I mean, they could be, but almost certainly they're not paying each other. They're actually paying themselves and keeping the same amount of money they had to start with. And this is a central problem where if your goal is to try and create coin joins, breaking the common input ownership heuristic, but at the same time, you don't want to give away that you're doing that, right? And so that's where Payjoin comes in, because Payjoin is like accepting the inevitable. It's saying, okay, well, if I actually want a mixing transaction to look like a payment transaction, it unfortunately does actually have to be a payment transaction. Is that 100% true? No. But Payjoin says, okay, let's accept that. Let's do mixing transactions in payment transactions. In other words, together at the same time. So this was just another example of the same problem. So that's why we end up with stuff like this, where if you can see here, we have actually Alice paid Bob 0.1. So if you imagine looking at this on the blockchain, and we'll see a concrete example shortly. If you imagine looking at this on the blockchain, you certainly wouldn't expect that there was a payment of 0.1 Bitcoin. But actually, according to that logic, there was. And it's because Alice and Bob coordinate so that Bob, the receiver, actually contributes this input and he receives back this output, and the net difference between the input he provides and the output he receives is 0.1. So he was actually paid 0.1, even though, again, it's not obvious. So I hope if anybody still wasn't 100% sure what a Payjoin is, they can see from that kind of example what it is. All right, so we're going through the history. Basically, there was a few blog posts there. I'm not sure if any of them are superb, although, of course, mine is amazing, right? Of course. But what is good, I think, is a nice, simple summary of Payjoin on the Bitcoin wiki. So it goes over those basic ideas there in just a couple of paragraphs, so you get the basics. If you want to explain it to someone else, I'd say probably point them at that Bitcoin wiki article instead. Right. So we had the idea, it was out there in 2018. It had become somewhat concrete as an idea that, we really would like to do this. And you'll find discussions on the mailing list from, I guess, late 2018. I'm going to point one out in a minute. Before I actually started writing any code for it, though, I did want to sort of figure a couple of details out. I think I might have forgotten to open this link. Yeah. Let me open this link now so you can see it. This link is interesting, not so much because of the content of here, a description of a protocol for Payjoin, but because of the discussion that happened afterwards, particularly when Laurent MT asked and raised several points And these points, it's a discussion mostly between myself, Chris Belcher, and Lauren MT. And we're discussing different heuristics that might give away, even though the example I just showed you, I was saying, oh, you don't know it's a payment of 0.1 because, you can't see the amount, whatever. There's more to it than that, right? There's also like, how do wallets select inputs to provide the necessary amount of Bitcoin to make the payment? Every wallet's a bit different in this regard, but there are various rules that you can think about. And what is discussed here is something we ended up calling the unintended, no, what am I talking about? The, what's it called again? The UIH, the unnecessary, that's it. Thank you. Yeah, unnecessary. The unnecessary input heuristic. So I'm not going to go into it now because I think it's going to take a bit too long, but I strongly recommend reading it. And we even broke down the unnecessary input heuristic into two types. 1 and 2. It's kind of confusing, actually. But to give you a very high level idea, it's just like, if you're going to be paying 1 Bitcoin, you wouldn't use a 2 Bitcoin UTXO and a 10 Bitcoin UTXO to pay 1 Bitcoin. Because the 2 Bitcoin UTXO on its own would have been way more than enough, right? Now, is that an actually absolute statement? Nowhere near is it absolutely true, because wallets have really complicated ways of choosing UTXOs. But that's a general idea, and there's a lot to investigate there. It's still an open question what one should do about that in the context of, so to be clear, in the context of Payjoin, where we're selecting those now from 2 different wallets, and we're trying to make sure it doesn't look suspicious. Okay, so that was the discussion on that gist that I linked there. Now, existing implementation. So here I'm talking about things that were implemented probably late 2018, early 2019. I don't remember the details. But at that time, I myself worked on a Payjoin implementation. Here it is, within Join Market. So that's that link there. Oh, it's just code, so I'm not going to show it you now. But that was an implementation where basically the idea was, let's do Payjoin, but only between 2 Join Market wallets, because it's much easier that way. And where we use the existing messaging infrastructure where Join Market bots talk to each other over end-to-end encrypted communication over IRC servers. And let's just have that happen, use that messaging channel and just coordinate that protocol so that one Join Market wallet owner can pay another Join Market wallet owner. And around the same time, I've put December 2018 here. Now, Max was kind enough to give me the links here. Samurai did what they called stowaway. I think this is the actual code link, which I'll add to the paste bin before I re-upload it. And there's some kind of high-level description of it here, and there's some code here. And they were basically doing the same thing as what I did in Join Market, which was, let's just do Payjoin, but they called it stowaway between 2 and I keep getting my names mixed up, Samurai wallets. Yeah, so 2 Samurai wallets can pay each other with stowaway and use exactly this technique where the receiver contributes UTXOs to the transaction, thus breaking the common input ownership heuristic and making the payment amount unclear. Okay, so those were early implementations. Those were like, let's just get this done. We might as well just do something that actually works. But the real issue, of course, is that payments are often between parties not using the same wallet. In fact, obviously, the majority of payments occur between parties not using the same wallet. And so we really needed a standard, and that started getting discussed. And I think the first person who really sort of took the initiative on that was Ryan Havar, who ran a business called Busterbit. And so that's why he called his proposal BusterPay. And he created a BIP, which I think is there. Yeah. So it's BIP 79. And it's basically lays out in fairly simple terms a way that, now the focus here is more on, it's not so much on 2 people, 2 peers, so to speak, using a phone wallet or using a software wallet on their desktop. But the focus here is more on a customer paying a merchant. That's not to say it insists on that, but it's that focus because it's a client-server architecture where the server is actually a web server, and he describes in detail a protocol whereby using an HTTP post request, you could put in the body of the request a proposed transaction, And here's where the kind of like the smartness of a good Payjoin protocol comes in, is that and we discussed this at that London meeting in quite some detail. The original proposer who wants to pay with a Payjoin. So you're a merchant and you're selling widgets for 1 BTC. I'm a customer. I come along and I want to pay you, but I want to pay you with Payjoin because I think it's better for privacy and better for blah blah blah. So I don't just say, please, can I do a Payjoin? I send you a payment which is not a Payjoin, which I've actually signed because I'm intending to pay you, right? So I may as well do this. I send you a payment that's a transaction. Instead of broadcasting my payment on the network, which is obviously the normal workflow, and then you as the merchant just notice the payment on the blockchain and then you say, okay. Instead of that, I sign the transaction as normal, but do not broadcast it. And I send it to you in the post in the body of a post request. You receive that and you look at it and you say to yourself, that looks like a decent, correct payment of this invoice. Good. Now, because he's used the Payjoin flag, let's say, I'm going to send him back a partially signed Bitcoin transaction. And he is going to co-sign that and then complete the Payjoin. Because remember, that's the whole thing about Payjoin, is like any Coinjoin, both parties or more than one party has to sign the inputs. So he signs his input, or inputs plural, sends it back to me as the response to my request. I look at what he sent me and say, yeah, that's still basically the same transaction. I'm still spending the same amount of money. I'm not getting cheated. He's signed his inputs. His inputs look the right type, like they're the same kind of input as my kind of input, and blah, blah, blah. There's a set of checks. And then I say, yep, I agree. Then I co-sign that Payjoin transaction, and I do broadcast that onto the network, unlike the original proposal transaction, which I did not broadcast on the network. And then you as a merchant, you keep an eye on the blockchain. If you see the Payjoin transaction was broadcast, great. That means you were paid, your invoice was paid. If you don't, after like 1 minute, then you have in your back pocket the original payment transaction that I sent you. And so the nice thing about this protocol is that it ensures that the payment goes through whatever happens. And maybe I should ask this as a question. Can anybody tell me why, or can you explain why is it important that in the Payjoin protocol, the sender, the customer who is paying, sends this non-Payjoin transaction first? Anybody want to answer that? Max knows, unsurprisingly.
Should we go? I don't know who is more of an expert between Max and OpenNoms. I want to go for the lesser expert first.
Don't say that. Now you're going to insult someone.
Well, I can't choose. I don't know.
Just choose randomly. Choose randomly.
I'm going to coin toss, and I'm going to say OpenNoms first, and then Max.
Right. Thanks. So it is very important to limit the queries the sender can do, the payer can do, because otherwise, if you wouldn't send over a valid transaction first, then they could just keep asking until he knows all the UTXOs in the wallet, and that would be a big privacy leak.
Right. Anybody have any different opinions? Max?
No, it's basically denial of service protection.
Yeah.
That's it, to have an economic cost for users misbehaving. And again, this is a payment Coinjoin, right? So the user actually wants to buy something from the merchant, and he wants to make that transaction anyhow. So he can sign it, and if the receiver is no longer online, or if something goes wrong, it's just broadcasted anyhow, without the added privacy of the Payjoin, but it's a final transaction.
Yeah. So just maybe I could expand on that question, because I think this is actually a really important point. Does anybody think that anti-denial of, or I want to call it anti-snooping measure? Denial of service is like a bit vague because you can look at it various ways, but I think we're particularly worried about the snooping attack, where people find out the merchants, as many as possible, that they iterate over the merchants' UTXOs, find out all the contents of their wallet. Does anyone think that this measure is not sufficient to stop that attack?
Well, I think it is not sufficient, because if the original payment proposed is the highest amount is higher than what amount is in the seller's wallet, then it could expose the bull wallet on the first step.
Yeah, but I'm not sure how avoidable that is. Like if you're a merchant and you have widgets for $100 and your current wallet, I don't know. It's a really tricky point, I think.
Can we go to nothing much?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Nothing much.
So a complication of this is that the merchant has to select a specific input that they would like to join. And if that process is not deterministic, that means that multiple requests could reveal different ones. So I think this is actually orthogonal to having the payment amount. Because if a user sends a payment, whatever the merchant responds with should be determined completely by what they intended to receive, so that this request for Bitcoin does not leak more than the minimum information required to participate in this protocol.
I know that. Do you? I don't know if everyone here's read BIP 79, but he was quite specific about that point. That he said if you were, you should always. The merchant must be careful to always respond with the same proposed, like joining UTXO. If he's receiving requests from now, is it the same exact transaction or the same UTXO in the transaction? There's an interesting point. There's some subtle detail. Now, I'm trying to look at I guess you can see on my screen. Here we are. Yeah. To prevent an attack where a receiver has continually sent variations of the same transaction to enumerate the receiver's UTXO set, it is essential that the receiver always returns the same contributed inputs when it's seen the same inputs. So I don't think he worded it maybe the best way there, but I understood him to mean that if someone keeps sending a proposed transaction spending the same UTXOs from the sender, you should return the same contributed UTXOs as the receiver. But there's a slight detail that's maybe missed there, because what if the sender sends a new version where the input set is not identical but is overlapping? Anyway, you can see I didn't really want to go into like an extreme detail here because I think this is a really tricky point, but I did want to raise it because I think this discussion is maybe not entirely finished. When people think carefully about how you might attack Payjoin, there's various different angles to attacking it and what that means even. But certainly this thing of snooping is something that people are going to really try hard to get it right. And I think that principle he expresses there is a very useful one, but I'm not sure that even that is quite enough to say, yeah, you know what, this is kind of a safe thing. You know, there's no possibility of snooping. But I think another high-level consideration to bear in mind is that merchants, by the nature of being merchants, they are exposing quite a bit of information, and businesses generally, at least in the current version of Bitcoin, where the protocol is completely transparent in terms of amounts and the transaction graph. Just buying stuff from a merchant is a way to expose information about them, and that was seen even in the very earliest academic analysis of Bitcoin privacy in 2013. I think if you look on the Bitcoin privacy wiki page, you'll see a section called the mystery shopper payment, and Chris Belcher, who wrote that, explains in some detail there. Anyway, it's a big topic, but I wanted to highlight it because it is one of the more important conceptual and technical issues in the idea of Payjoin. So
there's a couple of people would like to speak, Adam, if that's okay.
That's okay. Go ahead.
So there's a fellow Jitsa, I don't see a name, that has their hand up. So speak now if you can hear me, fellow Jitsa. You have your hand up.
Hi. Yes, one way to limit that interaction is by making the endpoint disposables. So you create an endpoint for receiving only one proposal.
Oh,
And
nice.
is one use only. It's possible, for example, to make easier. Okay, it's easy to do, but for example, in in if your endpoint is a Tor onion
Yes.
address, you can create as many disposable addresses as you want, or you can manipulate the URL in your website
Yeah.
to make those endpoints disposable. So in that way, um, uh, the buyer doesn't have a valid endpoint to continue
Yeah.
making proposals to you.
But you must have a mechanism where, but this is where the subtlety of whether it's a peer-to-peer payment or a merchant payment comes in, because if you did that as a merchant, you'd just be like spawning out new onions or endpoints or whatever you call them for every payment request. But that doesn't really make any difference in that case, right? Because that's how it works. Like I was just experimenting with a BTC Pay server instance that Mr. Cux had set up, and I just kept pinging it with different requests, right? It doesn't really matter if it's an onion there, does it?
No, it doesn't matter really. You're right. But for example, for a script key, you can associate an onion address to a script key and
Right.
make it disposable. So you can only receive one proposal for that script key. Well,
yeah, by the way, this is, for those of you who don't know, that's Lucas Ontivero, who's a Wasabi developer, right? Yeah.
You doxing him. I think he wanted to stay private.
No, he was on earlier. With a different
good.
name. And he told us his name, so I don't think that's quite... Otherwise, yeah, I would have been doxing him.
I think Max wanted to say something as well.
Okay.
Yeah, many good points have been brought up. One thing that I also just realized is that the sender can do a double spending attack, basically, because he makes the first signed transaction and he then receives the or pre-signed or partially signed transaction from the receiver, so he knows the fee rate, right? So he can simply not sign the second transaction, the Payjoin transaction, and double spend the original transaction, paying back to himself with a slightly higher fee rate. And if he's even the one to broadcast this transaction first, the Payjoin transaction might actually, or like the original transaction might not even be broadcasted, but because full nodes will think it's a double spend if RBF is not activated. So that might be an issue too.
Yeah, I can't remember the thinking around that. I seem to remember reading something about it somewhere. That's an interesting point, though, for sure. Yeah. Okay. Thanks. That's actually, I can't answer that right now. That's interesting. I can't remember. So let's keep going, because I think we want to like get to the meat of it, is like what people are doing now. But I just wanted to give the history. So that was the BIP. That's really interesting reading. It's not difficult to read. I had a couple of issues with it, though, and I did raise them. Ooh, was it this one? Yeah. Yes, this was January 2019. So Ryan Haval had like posted the proposal, and I wrote some thoughts on it here. There were fairly minor things, like, first of all, the name. I didn't like the name. Protocol versioning. Other people didn't seem to think it mattered very much, although apparently some of them are changing their mind now. Then there was the whole thing about the unnecessary input heuristic, which we talked about earlier. It's kind of interesting to discuss whether something like that should be put into such a BIP, such a standardization document, or whether it should be left up to people's implementation. And we'll kind of come back to that at the end. There's some other like technical questions, but anyway, you can read that if you're interested in such stuff. The conversation in different venues has been ongoing. Now, but what was the real like big change recently was this one from BTC Pay server. So here, this is now the spec document that they've written, and is still actually undergoing changes as we speak. Payjoin spec in the BTC Pay server doc repo goes through basically what it describes as a delta to that BIP 79 that we just looked at. So it's the same basic idea in terms of making an HTTP request to some endpoint using, oh, I forgot to mention, of course, importantly, BIP21 URI. So what's BIP21 URI? Actually, let's open it to the floor. Somebody explain what a BIP21 URI is.
Any hands?
Is everyone gone to sleep?
I don't think anyone knows the answer. Oh, no, go for it.
So BIP21 URI is a URI with a Bitcoin scheme. A scheme is just a standard thing for all URIs that describes the protocol. And following that is a Bitcoin address and optionally some metadata parameters. And it's just a standard format that makes it so that you can click on a payment. And if you have a wallet configured locally on your computer, then it could go from, say, an email or a website directly to that wallet with the correct payment amount and the correct destination address. I think there's an optional payment description as well. I don't remember the details.
Yeah, I think the idea is that you can have several optional fields. You can also have required fields such that if if it's not recognized, then that's not allowed, and you have not optional fields. So an example of this. Oh, I just realized I can't really show you. I don't know how. No, I guess my because I can't move out of this window unless I. Oh God, how do I? Maybe I go paste bin. Yeah, that'll do.
You can just paste it into the URL bar.
Well, that's also even better. Yeah, yeah, I could just do that. So there's an example of from Mr. Cox's donation BTC Pay server instance, and you can see you've got this scheme as nothing much just said is Bitcoin. So we've been using that since God knows when, 2012, 2011. It's been around a long time. That's why it's BIP21, right? It's an early BIP. Then you've got the address, and you've got other fields, amount, and critically in this case, PJ, meaning Payjoin, as being the flag that tells the merchant or whoever's receiving the payment that this is intended to follow that Payjoin protocol that BTC Pay server are defining in that document, which is itself a delta to BIP79, which had like Buster Pay or whatever instead, and this just has Payjoin. So it's basically a delta which doesn't change that much. If we go back to the spec here, it doesn't change that much. But it changes a few things about the communication between the parties. And probably the most important change, apart from just trivially the name, is that it uses PSBT. This is one of the things I was complaining about the original proposal at the time in Buster Pay was I thought, well, no, let's be serious. We've got to use PSBT because everyone's obviously going to migrate to that, and it's a sufficiently flexible, standard for cross-wallet sending transactions. Does everyone know what PSBT is? Does anyone not know what PSBT is? Speak now or forever hold your peace. It means partially signed Bitcoin transaction. Okay, so it's a standard BIP 174, and so this specifies using BIP 174. By the way, I should correct myself though. It does actually allow you to use a raw hex form, just a hex format for a transaction instead of PSBT. But as far as I'm aware, everyone who's actually implemented this is using PSBT. Okay, so and it just adds a little bit more detail, and it also adds stuff that I think is very useful, which is it tells you. So if you ever find yourself in a position where you want just one night you're bored and you just want to implement Payjoin, you've got the advantage that it tells you all like the checks that you should be doing. You check this about the transaction, check that about the transaction, and so on both the receiver side and the sender side. And then it's got some like interesting considerations about the relationship between the choices we make in building these transactions and the position of the blockchain analyst, and that's something we're going to be moving on to in the next few steps of this presentation discussion. So they brought out that document and they implemented it within BTC Pay server. And can anybody tell me what date roughly? Does anyone know roughly what date they actually pushed that out? It must have been about 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. Anyone know? Not sure? No? Yeah, whatever. It was recently anyway. So I wanted to start to move into more concrete things now. So implementations. Let me just
quickly, Adam. There's a few questions on the YouTube. I wonder if this is a good time to go to them.
Why not? Let's go for it. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So Cal Festino, apologies if I pronounce your name wrong. In this merchant scenario, could the merchant help coordinate combining purchases from different shoppers in the same transaction to mix more UTXOs?
Yeah, I think that's difficult. Some things that have been discussed, something simpler than that, but somewhat similar, is if I pull back up that, where was just the BTC Pay server document there. One thing that was discussed was, receivers payment batching, which I think is kind of a nice little thing because it's not hard. Is that because the way the protocol is defined, the sender of the payment doesn't bother looking at the outputs which do not belong to him. And that allows the receiver to be flexible and batch his own payments to other suppliers. He might want to pay 3 different people at the same time. He can batch that into the Payjoin, which makes it more economical for him at least, and also sort of confuses the blockchain analysis a little bit more. That's debatable. Now, the idea of having multiple payers pay at the same time, it brings us back to that coordination problem that nothing much mentioned at the start. OpenOms is telling me it was 19 days ago it was released. Yeah, it brings us back to that coordination problem that nothing much mentioned at the start, which is when you try and do Coinjoin with 4, 5, 10 people, somehow they've got to all be there at the same time. And okay, the good thing, of course, is that they don't have the problem of coordinating the same output amount because they're all just making their own payments, so that's fine. But the bad thing is they'd all have to be making their payment at the same time. Like today, I was testing this protocol, and I was just like, it was so cool doing coin joins that take like less than 1 second because I was pressing on the keyboard and the payment just went through, right? It's like, wow, because I'm so used in my head to dealing with like join market where it takes a minute to figure everything out and then send all the data back and forth, and then there's a coin join, right? So the answer is yes, it's possible in theory, but I think there's some practical difficulties there. Any more questions?
I would add
Yes.
that this is
Sorry,
also,
go for it.
sorry, a privacy concern for the payers. They may
Right.
learn about each other's inputs and then refuse to sign, which I think is a serious issue.
Yeah. So to sort of reiterate, the coordination problem is there's like a coordination problem, there's a privacy problem, and there's like a protocol jamming problem, like which is like the protocol might not finish. So you've got whenever you coordinate between multiple parties, you have to deal with this stuff, and it's pretty hard. Yeah. Anyway, the upshot is all comes to the same thing, which is it would be very hard to do that. Yeah.
Okay, another question. This is from Emzies. Can I have 2 wallets and make a Payjoin to myself just to fake it and get more anonymity?
That's a really interesting question because, well, I think I know the answer, but that is especially for the people who aren't experts here. You should particularly think about this question. So can you repeat the question so they make sure they understand what the question is?
Absolutely. Can I have 2 wallets and make a Payjoin to myself just to fake it and get more anonymity from it?
Right. So anyone who's not an expert, do you have an opinion? Or anyone who is an expert, then go on. Anyone at all.
I'm not seeing any. I think Max. Max always knows the answer. Go on, Max.
The thing with Payjoin is that it's technographic, right? So it's not really clear that the common input ownership heuristic is broken. It might look like it actually upholds. So if you fake a Payjoin, you're just doing transaction batching, basically, or input consolidation. And in your case, the common input ownership heuristic holds up. So now I would say it's as good as the guess is. You might be de-anonymized or you might not be. It might fool someone. But as we try to get Payjoins technographic, this would actually reveal common ownership heuristic, at least in the end goal.
Yeah, I think one can answer a little bit more simply than that. Well, obviously that's correct. It's just that it's so by steganographic we mean that we're trying to make coin joins that look like ordinary, normal payment transactions. So if you make a Payjoin to yourself, it's not achieving any goal that I can understand anyway, because you're just making a payment to yourself. It doesn't. It's not. Notice how it's really interesting, because notice how it's different from doing a fake equal output Coinjoin. If you do a fake, I'm not arguing that that's a particularly good or a particularly bad thing to do, but if you do that, you're creating a Coinjoin which blockchain analysts might choose to flag and say that's a mixing transaction, right? But here you're creating something that just looks like an ordinary payment, so they wouldn't flag it. Now, that you may well raise the question: is it interesting to do payments to yourself? In other words, do like multiple hops kind of thing? Maybe, maybe not. It's a complicated question, but but intrinsically it's steganographic. That's the main answer. Yeah. So it doesn't really make sense.
And there's been a couple more questions. Can we fit them in?
Well, these are good questions. So as long as they're good questions, I think we can deal with them.
Okay, I think they're both Ramses and Cal Fastino again. So Enzo's updated question now is if I would like to top up, my second wallet, can I make a Payjoin to my second wallet just to fake it and get more anonymity from it?
Well, my answer is, what's the difference between doing that and just paying your second wallet? I don't see the difference. Because like in terms of their on-chain footprint, they look the same, like an ordinary payment and a Payjoin. That's the idea. Anyway, maybe I'll chat about this with MZ later, because we'll meet, I'm sure.
And then Cal Fastino again. Does Payjoin usually fragment or aggregate UTXOs?
Yeah,
I assume for privacy it would fragment. In that case, do you think it could cause a long-term effect on the size of the UTXO set on nodes?
Yeah, so I'm going to give my approximate answer, but I'm sure other people have opinions on this. As far as I understand, unlike equal-sized output Coinjoins, which do create extra UTXOs, well, kind of, because the right way to think about those is they're like payments to yourself. So actually, it's not true. Equal-sized Coinjoins over time are not going to make your wallet worse than some kind of equilibrium state. But they are obviously using up a lot of blockchain space. Payjoins, I'd argue, maybe even better, because you're making a payment anyway. So the only thing that's happening is on the receiver side. The sender side doesn't change anything. You use up the same inputs you would have used up anyway. You get back the same change you would have got back anyway. Nothing changed there. For the receiver, though, it does kind of change the dynamics of their wallet, because if you were going to receive, let's say, 10 payments a day, let's say you're a merchant and you're making regular receivings of Bitcoin. If you don't use any Payjoin at all, you're going to get 10 UTXOs in that day. You're just going to get 10 new UTXOs. At some point, you're going to have to consolidate them somehow. If, on the other hand, you use Payjoin for all of them, in the most extreme case, you just have one UTXO at the beginning of the day and one UTXO at the end of the day, because each new payment, you would consume the previous payment's UTXO as input, and you get a new one coming out. And we call that the snowball effect, because that tends to lead to larger and larger size of UTXO. Now, of course, the reality, nobody's going to be doing 100% Payjoins, so it's going to be more complicated. And it's also not 100% clear what the effect in terms of the economics of how much money you spend in transaction fees as a merchant using this technique versus not. Kind of a complicated question. Anybody else have any ideas on that? It's kind of an interesting one.
I think Pierre's got his hand up.
Yep.
So I've got another question. So if anyone want to stick with the question before, I can wait.
Okay, let's go to Max then, and then we'll go back to you, Pierre, after Max.
Okay, thank you.
It's an interesting question with the snowballing effect, right? Because on the one hand, if you use the same UTXO for Payjoin transactions over and over again, that might actually lead to fingerprinting that, in fact, a Payjoin transaction is going on.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
And then again, we would know that the common input ownership is actually broken. And then it actually might be worse, right?
Yeah.
So that is worth considering. And it's also, then it is a question of coin selection for how to do Payjoin, right? And I think here we can have a quite good effect with using equal value outputs of a Coinjoin, or the change of an equal value output Coinjoin. like Wasabi or Join Market.
Mm-hmm.
Because then here, if we, for example, both users have a change of a Coinjoin, and then they do a Payjoin, the heuristic would say that both of these changes belong to the same user, and that might help quite a lot with these, the fingerprinting of change, as it would screw up, I think, quite a lot.
But that gets even more complicated, right? Because if you in the example you just gave would be, it probably depends on what you mean. But if we did an equal sized output Coinjoin together, and there was 10 people, or let's say there's 50 people in the set, and then 2 of us in that set took the change outputs we got and made a Payjoin with them, then I think we're going to give away that we've done a Payjoin, because default, like the way the Coinjoin software works now, is it only produces 1 change output. It wouldn't produce 2, unless yours produces 2, in which case that's fair.
Yeah, okay, that's a good point. I'm not sure how it holds up for the participants of the same Coinjoin.
Right, not for the same Coinjoin, exactly, yeah. If you different Coinjoins, then that's definitely fine, yeah. Anyway, I think we're getting quite in the weeds here with a lot of details, but maybe it's okay, because these are the kind of things that people are thinking about as they're going through these protocols. I wanted to get on to
maybe we just have one last question from Pierre.
Yeah, go ahead. Pierre's question.
And then we'll move on. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Two questions actually.
Fine.
Why is it worse to do this snowballing? I didn't get it. Maybe you can elaborate on that. So that's the first question. And the second one, the sender have to provide a transaction to the receiver. The receiver does a partially signed Bitcoin transaction and sends it back to the sender. Is it right? Is this something like
That's correct.
a 3-way handshake? Is there sorry?
It's 2-way, not 3-way.
So the sender don't have to provide another output. So he just have to send the transaction. The transaction is completed with the... No, it's not completed from the receiver, right?
Yeah, I wish I had a nice picture to show you. Anyway, let me answer your 2 questions in sequence.
Yeah.
Why might snowball be bad, or why would it usually be bad? In the case where a merchant receives 100 payments in one day, if he were to take the first payment and use it as input to the second payment, then he would double the, let's say, fixed size. He would double the amount, go from 1 Bitcoin to 2 Bitcoin. And then he would use it again as an input to the next transaction, where he would receive another Bitcoin, and that would be 4 Bitcoin. And then by the end of the day, he'd have a single UTXO with 100 BTC. And that is, the bad thing about that is it's a very obvious behavior to observe on the blockchain. Because, usually if the way a merchant works now, they're going to receive normal sized they're going to get a lot of transactions where the inputs are just normal size, but here you could easily trace a single UTXO being consumed and then produced, consumed and then produced in a series of steps. It would. Now, I'm not saying 100%, because the whole point of all this is that nothing is certain in blockchain analysis. So it's not like anyone can be 100% sure of anything, but at least not just from the blockchain data on its own. But you don't want to make really obvious flags like that. So it's a thing. Now, your second question was about, I understand that you're a little confused about the sequence of events in a Payjoin as currently implemented. And I was about to say, I wish I had a nice diagram of steps. The best I can do is I think it is pretty simple if I can just explain it in a sufficiently clear way. If you look at this example transaction here, right, with Alice and Bob, do you see that? Pierre?
Yes, I can see it.
Yeah, okay. So how would it actually end up happening? Well, what is it now? Alice would come along and she would have these first 2, 0.05 and 0.09. She has those 2 inputs and she's planning to pay Bob 0.1. So 5 plus 9 being 14, and this is 10. So this adds up to enough to pay that 0.1. So she could make a normal transaction where the inputs were 0.09 and 0.05, and one of the outputs was 0.1 paying Bob, and the other output would be change paying her 0.04. Agreed?
Yes.
That would be a normal payment transaction where she pays 0.1 and she gets 0.04 back as change. All right. So here's what she does. She makes that transaction, the normal transaction. She signs it as normal. Now, the normal process, the next step is to broadcast it onto the Bitcoin network, but she does not do that. Instead, she sends the Payjoin request. Now, she's already got like a BIP21 URI. She's already got like a request from the server saying, please pay me $100, and here's the Payjoin URL. So she builds that standard normal payment transaction and sends it in her HTTP request to that Payjoin URL. And then the server only has to do the following, has to check that payment transaction is valid, does not broadcast it, instead creates a partially signed transaction of exactly the type that you're seeing here. So he is the one who creates this transaction. He takes the same inputs that Alice gave him. He takes the 0.05, the 0.09 inputs, right? He adds one of his own inputs. Then he creates two outputs, but the difference being, of course, that while Alice still gets her change, his output is no longer 0.1. It's now 0.18 because he added in the 0.08 that he provided to the inputs to balance it out, right? So he creates this transaction, but of course he can't completely sign and broadcast that transaction because he's not Alice and he can't sign these first two inputs because she owns those inputs. So he creates the transaction in a partially signed state where he has signed his input here and her inputs remain unsigned. And in that partially signed form as a PSBT, he sends it back as part of his HTTP response. When Alice receives it, she looks at it, does all the checks. If she's happy, she signs these first two inputs, broadcasts the whole thing onto the network. And if anything goes wrong in any stage of that process, one or the other party can just broadcast the original ordinary transaction. Does it make sense?
So correct me if I'm wrong. There are two transactions involved. One is from Alice. She sends a complete signed transaction to the receiver.
Yes.
The receiver just looks at it, and evaluate the signature is true, and then creates a new transaction, a completely new, partially signed Bitcoin transaction, and with the amounts of the previous transaction.
Yeah, but wait, it's not completely new. But wait, it's not completely new. I think maybe this is the point that's confusing you. The new one that he creates still uses the same Alice inputs as before. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
sorry. Yeah. The same inputs, but the transactions are different because the first transaction is already signed and the receiver needs an unsigned transaction. So a partially signed Bitcoin transaction, right?
Yeah, because don't forget, whatever signatures Alice had on the original transaction are no longer valid, right, in the new transaction. Because
yes.
Yeah, you get that. Yeah, you get that. I think you understand it, but maybe there's some detail that isn't 100% clear to you. But I think you've basically got it.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing much. Are you saying that you think the amounts shouldn't it be 0.09 and 0.05? Sorry.
I misread the 0.1 as 0.01 because all the other amounts. But it's nice that both are plausible.
Okay, right, yeah. So it's all fine, yeah. Okay, fine. Yeah, the thing about both amounts, maybe I should, since we're going through this, I know this is running on, but we're all right. I may as well just mention this now that it is explained in this blog post and many other places that when you look at this kind of transaction, you have kind of in general 4 possible interpretations. You could interpret it as being a payment of 0.18 with a change of 0.04 and not being a Payjoin. being an ordinary transaction. You could interpret it as being a payment of 0.04 and a change of 0.18 and not being a Payjoin. Or you could interpret it as a Payjoin. If you choose to interpret it as a Payjoin, it could be a Payjoin of at least there's two more interpretations, right? It could be the payment is 0.1, that's the real answer, and this is a contribution from the receiver. Or actually, maybe there's three. Anyway, there's multiple interpretations. I'll let you figure out the details yourself. The point is that if you can either take the position you think it's a Payjoin, or you can take a position you think it's not a Payjoin, and that will give you different possible interpretations. But don't think it would be silly to think that Payjoin somehow hides the amount totally. Obviously, it doesn't hide the amount totally. Obviously, there are only a fixed number of combinations of numbers here. So unless this is like opening a Lightning channel, and then you just don't know what's going on, right? Because who's paying who? You could be paying someone on the other side of the network, or it could be a coin swap and so on and so on. But if we just restrict ourselves to ordinary transactions or Payjoins, there are like a fixed finite number of possible interpretations. Okay. I do want to get to the end of what I wanted to say. So just give me a chance, guys. So I've done that. Oh, yeah, I had a separate new version. Yeah. So what about implementations? We just mentioned the BTC Pay server Delta to BIP79, which I'm sometimes calling BIP79++ in some documents. So Wasabi have merged a PR into master. Thanks to Max for confirming these details for me. And I did actually have there it is. This is the pull request that was merged 3528 5 days ago, it looks like. From there's an interesting name. I wonder who that is. That's the person who's on the call. Okay, so he's merged that. So they've got sender side BIP79 in quotes ++. So what that means is that you can use a Wasabi wallet to pay a BTC Pay server merchant using this technique, as we just described it, where either it works or you fall back and you make an ordinary payment anyway. Also, myself recently, this is not merged into master because there's this big kind of refactoring behind it. I've basically finished in the sense that it's working, but not finished in the sense of merging it. The implementation in pull 536 in join market. So there's two examples. Now, BTC Pay server itself, I heard, has some kind of plan or maybe has completed an implementation for like a client wallet of Payjoin. Mr. Cox, who worked on the BTC Pay server code for this, pointed me at this JavaScript library. I don't know the exact relevance, but it's kind of interesting actually, because you can look at the logic.
So Mr. Cox is actually in the YouTube comments. I wonder if,
right. Well, if he wants to tell me something, he can.
If Mr. Cox wants to join the call, maybe I'll just post the link to the call in the YouTube comments.
Or just if not, just tell us the status, because I know I heard that they have some kind of client wallet as opposed to not just the server wallet.
Okay, continue for now, Adam. I'll post the link in the comments. Maybe he doesn't want to join the call, but I'll see.
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine. And I was just going through the implementations. Now, I also heard, maybe somebody can help me out on this, that Blue Wallet, am I getting this right, have done or are doing a BIP79+ implementation. Anybody know that? Or
Yes, as far as I know, this JavaScript Payjoin client library is used by Blue Wallet.
I see, right.
So they are working on at least the sender side and are yet unsure about the receiving side.
Okay, so that leaves one remaining open question I'd like to, it's a practical question. Does anyone know, or does anyone have opinions about which other wallets should or could or will implement this? Because in a minute, I'm going to show you the result of my implementation and a little discussion of like fingerprinting. But before we do that, which other wallets could or should or will implement this?
Let's go to MZ.
Hello. Yeah, I'm now here. Of course, Electrum should implement it.
Yeah, I agree. Has anybody heard from them about it, or? Go ahead,
No.
MZ. No. Okay, I'll ping Ghost and see if anyone can tell me anything.
And then if MZ's finished, we'll go Max.
Oh no, I
Green
was
wallet.
about to say the same. Electrum wallet, but as OpenNOM brings up green wallet, so maybe he has a couple words here too.
OpenNoms. Anything to add to Green Wallet?
Well, it's just it's been obviously a Blockstream kind of blog post to kick off all this. So they've been sponsoring BTC Pay to use the standard they were proposing. So it would be quite logical to get into Green Wallet as soon as possible as well. I would hope so.
Right, but the thing is, what about and this brings us nicely into the topic of fingerprinting, because unless I missed something, Green Wallet's inputs are distinct.
Well, only if they would be a two multisig if they use that feature, but you not necessarily use that feature in the Green Wallet. It's optional.
Oh, can you? Right, I remember, because it's funny, I actually have Green Wallet and I use it fairly regularly, but I never bothered to look at the actual transactions. I thought that it was either 2 of 2 or 2 of 3, wasn't it? Or is there an option to have just single key?
I think it's 2 of 2, but you can have a different. So it's either 2FA or Blockstream as the other party. So it's either yourself or Blockstream.
So are you saying that you think that it's perfectly reasonable, and it is reasonable, that they could implement Payjoin between Green Wallet wallets? Because I don't think it would work with a merchant, right? Because the merchant would not have the same kind of input scripts. Am I missing something? Okay, so anyway, this brings us on to the topic of fingerprinting. So the way I want to introduce this topic, I have an idea about this.
Let's just quickly see.
Ahead,
Did MZ want to say something?
Yeah.
I have a problem to get the hand down.
Oh, okay. I will ignore your hand from now on. Okay, sorry, Adam. Continue.
Yeah, so I want to introduce this topic by showing you. I'm afraid this is not very clear on the screen because the way Mastodon displays or on the browser. But here, if you look at this section here, ignore all this other stuff, Al Jazeera English. I'm not quite sure why I'm subscribed to that. But anyway, the above was a payment to BTC. Yeah, so what I raised on this this post is I made my second experiment to. I had a BTC Pay server remote instance that I just chose from developer gave me, and I paid him, and I looked at the transaction. Well, actually, that's not exactly true. I already knew what I was going to see, but you might not know what you're going to see. So when I made this Payjoin transaction using this new system, using my Join Market wallet, and by the way, if you're confused, Join Market does have native SegWit wallets. It's just that we don't really use them because you can't use them in the equal amount Coinjoins. But anyway, this is from a Join Market wallet to a BTC Pay server instance, and it produced this transaction, right? Now, first of all, let's look at the amounts. Is there anything that stands out about the amounts? So it's difficult to read, maybe. I don't know. Can you all read it clearly, the amounts?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the number one input and the number one output both have 0.017, and the second the number one output also have 0.017.
No. The second input and the second output both have 0.01.
Yeah. 2 times 0.17.
Yeah, but they're still
Seems,
they're close. They're close values, but they're not identical. And so that I don't think, when you think about it, I don't think you'll find that's very significant in itself, at least. So actually, I was kind of asking a trick question because unless you're talking about what's already highlighted here in blue, there isn't really anything remarkable about those amounts. And in fact, blockstream.info, this particular block explorer, does like mark rounded amounts, and it doesn't. Obviously, there is no rounded amounts here because I chose a random payment amount, right? But that was my choice because it was a donation server, so I could choose a payment amount. So the amounts don't give away very much, and indeed, you would be hard pressed to figure out how much I donated just from looking at these numbers. It would be pretty hard. You could come up with a list of possibilities. That's fine. But the interesting thing is, if you actually expand the transaction, you look at the full serialization, or as they nicely format the serialization here, there is something that really stands out. Well, really, there is something that might stand out about this transaction. I think maybe two things. The first one is the unnecessary input heuristic, which we discussed earlier. And so what that would mean here is, actually, let's go back. What that would mean here is that if the payment, let's say this was an ordinary payment of 0.017, then why would the payer produce 0.0179 and 0.00198? What would be the necessity of adding this extra input? Now, you might say for fees, but that's already quite a lot bigger than needed for fees there. So that's one version of the unnecessary input heuristic, and this does kind of flag that. But the interesting thing is that quite a lot of transactions, ordinary transactions, flag that heuristic anyway. So I'm quite interested to talk to Larry or whoever it is that runs this block explorer nowadays and ask them how often they make this flag, because I think they're going to be making that flag attached to transactions quite often. I'm not sure if it's going to be like 20% or 50% or what, but I'd like to know. But there's one other thing about this transaction that flags. I wonder if anybody's got a really good eyes and can see it just from looking at that. Or maybe you already...
I have a guess.
Go ahead.
The end sequence number.
Yeah, nice. Very good. Now, did you read about or hear about that recently, or did you actually see it just from looking?
I see it. So,
that's very good. Yeah. This is different. This here and this here. Okay, who was that? Was that Pierre?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you happen to know, or do you remember, Pierre, what the significance of these particular values is?
I think he's also in the YouTube chat. It's 0xb10c. He wrote an article a couple of days ago about the I think the end sequence number for time locks. I think so. It's about the fee sniping attack. If I'm right.
Well, it's related to that for sure. Yeah.
It's related to that. So
okay.
It basically means, I think, that you only can relay transaction with the current block height.
Something like that. Yeah. So I mean, obviously we're not going to have like an hour lecture on the details of Bitcoin logic here, but let's just give a few key points. So first of all, this is the maximum integer in 4 bytes, and this is like the default, if you like, the default end sequence number, and it indicates that the input is final in some kind of vague sense that meant something to Satoshi back in the day, but it's evolved in ways that a lot of people can barely understand. It's all a bit weird. But basically, if a transaction is final in the sense that all of these values are the largest integer, f 4 bytes maximum integer. If they all have that value, then the n lock time field in the transaction, which is shown somewhere or not. Anyway, the n lock time field is disabled. So if you want to use an n lock time value, the problem is that if you have all the sequence numbers as that maximum value, it won't be enabled. So what Bitcoin Core does is it uses this value, and this value is 1 less than the maximum integer. So you see it's an E instead of an F at the end, so it's 1 less in hex. And that value enables the nlock time field to be enabled. And if it's enabled, you can do what Pierre just mentioned, which is called an anti-fee sniping measure, which is basically you set the lock time to a recent block, and for some confusing reason that I always forget, that enables that helps with avoiding some kind of a mining attack. Does anyone want to explain it? Because I can never remember how it works.
So I believe this is not exactly correct. The problem with the fee sniping attack is if there's a block confirmed that spent a lot on fees, a miner has an incentive to mine a parent of that block and reorg. And the difference in the fees relative to the current state of the mempool is what they would gain by doing that. And maybe that's enough to offset the block subsidy and the difficulty of actually mining 2 blocks and succeeding in a reorg. But that would be fixed by setting the end lock time field.
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I think Nicholas Doria was confused about this yesterday as well. I'm trying the end sequence, that there's a connection between the two. You want to set the end lock time to fix this problem, but you can't set the end lock time and also set all the end sequence values to FF times 4. Because it disables it. Okay. So is that so we went over this yesterday in some detail because we were discussing this point in the BTC Pay server Mattermost. I can recommend this particular Stack Exchange discussion that helps to explain the rather complicated relationship between check lock time. Well, that's talking about check lock time verify, but it also talks about end lock time relationship to end sequence. So there's the question of what the actual rules are. Then there's the question of what does Bitcoin Core usually do, and that's relevant because a wallet like JoinMarket might want to copy what Bitcoin Core usually does. And then there's the additional complicating factor of whether you're setting the RBF or not, opt-in RBF. To set that, you need to set this field, this end sequence, to maxint -2, whereas this is only maxint -1. So in this case, RBF is disabled. So there are a whole bunch of complicated rules and considerations here. And the upshot of a long conversation that I had with Nicholas Doria yesterday was that he agreed that we should just basically have the server wallet just agree with the sender or the client wallet's setting of end lock time. So in JoinMarket's case, I always have this end sequence value set to enable the end lock time, right? And his server, his end Bitcoin code, was by default just sending out the maximum integer always. And again, the reasons are complicated, but he's actually updated it now, apparently. So what is the point of me going into all these details? Well, I just wanted to explain to people just how tricky these questions are. Like, if we're going to try to have a steganographic transaction, we're going to have to try to make sure that the servers, in my opinion, the rule is just that the servers should absolutely mimic the sending wallet. So the sending wallet could be some mobile wallet like Green Wallet, or I don't know if that even works, or it could be, Electrum or whatever. But yeah. So sorry, I'm just reading the chat there. So my point is that I think the servers have to mimic the clients, even though even that statement is not quite clear enough, right? And the protocol should be really, really clear on these points, I think. Okay, I open the floor now. Yeah. Let's
Max.
Good that you bring this up, Adam. And BTC Pay server already does this with the end address types, which is another way to fingerprint this.
Very good point.
So if the receiver initially proposes a native SegWit Bech32 address, but the sender spends a coin and generates an address, a change address that is legacy, then in the Payjoin transaction, the receiver will respond and switch his receiving address at least to a legacy address. And if he has, or I'm not sure if they actually also select a coin, and preferably if it's legacy, but that would be optimal to do.
Yeah, I want to expand a bit on those points. So I think, first of all, we're mostly concerned with the inputs, not the outputs, because it seems to me that having more than one script pub key type in the output is not really a problem, because it's very, very common, right, for a sending wallet to have a different script pub key than a receiving wallet. So it's very common for the change to be a different. That's bad though, because it does. That's one of the ways you identify change outputs. So yeah, maybe you're right. But especially on the inputs, right? That's what really counts. And the thing is that BTC Pay Server, as I understand it from talking with Mr. Cox, maybe it was, I think he told me that the wallet does not yet have the ability, the merchant wallet I'm talking about, I may be wrong here. I think he said that the merchant wallet doesn't yet have the ability to support multiple script pub key types at once, right? So you can have a legacy, let's say a P2SH, P2W, PKH wallet in BTC Pay Server merchant, or you can have a native BEC32 BTC Pay Server merchant wallet. But I don't think you can currently have one that mixes both types together. And that would be ideal for our scenario, because we obviously want to allow different sending wallets to get Payjoins successfully through and not have to fall back to the default. But yeah, absolutely. The script pub key is a huge issue as well as all this. This is like minutiae, the end sequence, but you have to get it right. So it's tricky.
And there's a couple of links been posted in the comments. Nothing much posted. The Explorer privacy analysis link. Perhaps you could get that up, Adam.
Oh, nice. Right. I'm just open. Oh, it's opening in the wrong. Oh, I just need to move this tab. Hang on. No, that doesn't work. Oh God. Yeah.
Can you not just copy and paste?
Yeah, I'll copy and paste.
Link?
Sorry. I just. You're right. Sorry. Stupidity. I was just trying to do something else at the same time as well. Hang on. The first one you want me to open is the Explorer thing, right?
With the longer link, yeah.
Yeah, I got
that's got privacy analysis on it, yeah.
Oh, this is code. Oh, I see. This is what it does. I see. Oh, interesting. I see. For the now I understand what you're getting at. This tells you where they're actually flagging it. Yeah. Are they using just? I'm curious whether they're using what we called 1 or 2, but obviously I'll read that later. The other thing was a pull request. Copy that link address.
So both heuristics are used from what I saw.
Is it?
I only found it just now.
Excellent. Yeah.
And this is a shameless plug to please review my tiny documentation, like a comment about is final TX in the. If you look at the diff, it's quite simple. I mean, it's just a comment change, but
sure.
It's in sequence is so confusing. So confusing.
Yeah, I think it's confusing because the original concept behind it was not something that ended up being. But anyway, complicated question, isn't it? But I think the most important point there is that there is a connection between nlock time and nsequence. Is what I was trying to get at earlier. Is because Nicholas Doria didn't get it at first either, and I certainly wouldn't have got it unless I read up and researched it. But for me, it all came out of I wouldn't usually think about stuff like this, but it all came out of the fact that I was really keen on copying the anonymity set of both Bitcoin Core and Electrum in Join Market's non-Coinjoin payments, right? Because obviously it has to have it's a wallet. You have to have the ability to just make ordinary payments, right? So in that case, I want to be steganographic. Now, in the equal size Coinjoin outputs in Join Market, well, we give up. There's no possibility, so we don't even try. But because I did that, that's why I did this particular combination of end sequence and end lock time in Join Market, and that's why when I did this Payjoin with BTC Pay Server, because their logic didn't agree precisely with mine, we got this fingerprint. Yeah.
I think El Buddha wanted to speak, but I think I can't hear El Buddha. So tell me if El Buddha's speaking.
I'll tell you if he's speaking.
No, just to mention about the end sequence, that many people prefer to signal replaced by fee.
Yes.
Because they feel uncomfortable or they want to be sure to make the transaction confirm in the time frame that they want. So
yes,
that's something that it can fingerprint the wallet that the user is using. So just to have in mind that.
And you know what's even more confusing is that correct me if I'm wrong, Lucas, but I believe that you only have to set the RBF flag in. Wait, is this right? In one input? You don't have to set it in all of them, do you? Can anybody help me out there? Well, I think that's
sorry.
true.
If you flag one input, only one input, then the transaction and all the child transactions are replaceable.
Yes.
Right. Of course, you can change that except the input. You can double spend the input that you flag.
Yeah. The reason I mention it is because when I was going over this with Nicolas Doria yesterday, we were trying to figure out exactly what we should do. We had to worry about what if the sender is not using the same end sequence in every input. I'm sorry, this is really in the weeds. So if the people here who maybe are not involved in like writing Payjoin software or Coinjoins, you might think this is it is a bit too much, right? But anyway, I think perhaps we should stop with all that extremely detailed stuff and just stick with the more high-level stuff for what remains. I guess we're running out of time, whatever that means. What does time mean anyway? I think this is an interesting little document because having gone way down into the weeds, let's go way up to the top again, right? Up to the highest level consideration. This is a document. Oh, it's not the top of it. This is a gist that, by the way, yeah, the gist is here, but you can't read it like this because the text doesn't wrap. But here you can read it. So this is a document from Laurent MT, who a lot of you will know is, I think it's accurate to say he's employed by Samurai. But anyway, it doesn't matter. He's an analyst who's been working on blockchain analysis and privacy tools for ages in Bitcoin. And he's giving some opinions here about, he talks about Payjoin transactions and deception tools and the concept of steganographic transactions, which we've discussed today. And he's addressing kind of this issue of fingerprinting that we just talked about. He's saying, well, if you want to avoid having fingerprinting, you kind of can go in two directions. You can kind of choose to have everyone have exactly the same fingerprint, or you can go in the direction of having fingerprints be random all the time. And he's arguing, I don't think I agree with everything he said, but I think I agree with a lot of what he says, that he's arguing that randomness is kind of better and more realistic because it's very, very hard for every wallet to be the same and have the same fingerprints in every detail, right? As you know, because what happens when somebody wants to update their software and then, and so on. I think that's largely true, but I think a couple of additional points I'd make is, first of all, we don't have infinite scope to be random, of course. Like the trivial example is if you want RBF, you can't just use maximum sequence number, right? The other point I'd make is that while it's true that if we're just talking about a big network of everyone talking to each other, then it's kind of hard for everyone to just agree with the same fingerprints. On the other hand, I would argue it's a bit easier for servers just to mimic and agree with the fingerprints of their clients, albeit it's not necessarily that easy because, as Max pointed out, different script pub key types are a bit of a hurdle. We can't really have Payjoins where the server produces a native SegWit input and the client produces a legacy input. Okay, it's just I do recommend reading it though. It gives you it's got some thoughtful points about different ways we might be building wallets with this steganographic transactions in mind. Okay, I'm pretty much done in my sort of talking part, so we can chat and talk things through maybe.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Adam. Any questions from either in the call or on the YouTube channel? I'm not seeing any hands. So a high level question, Adam.
Yeah.
Oh no, let's go to Adam. Let's go to Max.
Max. Max, yeah.
Go for Max.
The question is specifically, for example, RBF. Should the flag be truly random in the sense that it's a 50-50 chance between RBF signaling or not RBF signaling? Because the downside that I see here, and we talked about this at Wasabi, maybe Lucas can speak some more too, is that because currently only, if I remember, 0.6% of all native SegWit transactions signal for RBF. So if Wasabi would go with a 50-50, then there's a pretty high likelihood that the RBF SegWit-only transaction is from Wasabi. And so to work around this, what we've done is that, like on average, 0.6% or 2% of transactions will signal RBF. So it's still randomly chosen, but with a skew towards the actual usage on the network. Is that useful?
If you're asking me my opinion, I as I already said, I think that while in principle complete randomness is a more practical option than complete homogeneity, I was musing about this on Mastodon earlier today, and I was saying it's like on the one hand you could have a completely blank sheet of paper, and on the other hand you could have a sheet of paper where just masses of random scribbles, pen scribbles all over it. In either case, there's no information conveyed. Right, so if we try and go to the massive amount of scribbles, in other words, have everything activated randomly, it's highly problematic, isn't it? Because you, as an example, your wallet might really think that RBF is a bad thing, or might really think that RBF is a good thing, and might really want to have that feature, and therefore you can't really randomize it unless you're just going to give up with what you're trying to do. So what your question is another point that often gets raised, which is, okay, we want this thing to be random, but if we're trying to do randomness for the purpose of steganographic behavior, then we have to try and match our random distribution to the existing distribution on the network, which is then you get these like feedback loops. And I mean, it's possible, but it sounds damn complicated, right? So I really feel like the problem is a deep one that maybe the practical reality is a certain degree of randomness is the best we can hope for, and we can't have perfect randomness. But also, I think this specific case of this two-party protocol, I think I just think the practical reality is we have to just focus on the idea that the receiver mimics the sender's behavior, and it won't always be possible to get it right. But that's okay, because like, let's not forget that 10-20% of Payjoins on the network, if it's known to be 10-20% realistically, is more than enough, because it's gonna screw up any realistic assumption mechanism.
Let's go to nothing much.
Let's do that.
So there's another aspect of this which is something I find both deeply fascinating and kind of troubling. The concept of a Schelling point from game theory.
Yeah.
Here there's there's always a dilemma between your behavior as an individual trying to protect your own privacy and an individual acting as part of an ecosystem where privacy is an issue. And if we kind of assume that fungibility is emergent from privacy, and that is a desirable property of money, it's very unclear what is the optimal behavior. Like, if everybody could just agree to stop producing fingerprintable transactions and actually do it, that would be great. There's a huge technical barrier there. But then there's always a dilemma for, like, as an individual interested in Bitcoin success and in their own personal privacy, like, do you make sacrifices like participating in Coinjoins, which is an overt political act, right? It sends a message to the world at large. Or do you try and blend into the crowd and kind of mask yourself?
Yeah, but it's not really. I don't think that bifurcation or that what's the word? The two things is quite right, is it? Because Doing equal size coin joins, I agree, is an overt political act and could be in some circumstances a sacrifice, but you can't argue that it has no value at all in terms of
no. I'm arguing it has tremendous value.
No, I mean I mean specifically in creating privacy for that user.
Yeah, but I mean that could also mean that now you're banned from various exchanges.
Yeah. As I said, it is a sacrifice, but you can't argue that there isn't a positive effect specifically for that user.
No. Sorry if I accidentally implied that. That was not my intention at all. And actually, this was just I didn't want to get into Coinjoins. That was just like the easy example of an obvious trade-off.
Yeah.
In the context of this stuff, that just further complicates all of these discussions and really, I mean, I have nothing really to say. Practically speaking, it's just that like the nuances here are not just technical. It's also about like how people perceive these technical details. And I totally agree with your point. When I was on Stefan Livera, I was really hammering that Schelling point concept home. And specifically, I wanted to I'm trying to look at it in a bit more positive way and try to say something like, well, yeah, there's a Schelling point today that Bitcoin transactions are traceable, and indeed that doing anything apart from ordinary transactions looks suspicious. But I think maybe Payjoin could be part of the way we kind of do flip that Schelling point, because if we have techniques that make it not only normal but easy to slightly improve your privacy, even if they're not ideally they would be economically a benefit. We haven't discussed that today. It's a very interesting question about what is the economic impact of doing pay joins as opposed to ordinary transactions. Ideally, we could have techniques that improve that, like signature aggregation. But even if we don't have economic benefit, even if we just have like some very minor privacy benefit, and it's steganographic or it's opportunistic, so that it's very easy to do. Maybe we could flip the Schelling point to the extent, in the sense that we make blockchain analysis very ineffective to the point where it looks kind of stupid to try and claim that you're able to trace all this other stuff. Then maybe it's not so weird to be somebody who does coin joins or whatever. Yeah. I think it's more than that. It's absolutely critical because we already know objectively today that this analysis is not very scientifically rigorous.
Exactly.
But that doesn't. There's all these examples. I think the most prominent one was from the Dutch court system, where chain analytics companies were used as expert witnesses.
Yeah.
And that, I mean, from the point of view of law enforcement, what they would like as a service from these companies is a clear-cut, coherent narrative for non-technical people, and they don't really care if it's pseudoscientific or so ambiguity, which somebody with intellectual integrity, like a proper scientific analysis would do, is just not part of what's being sold as a service by these companies. So this is, I guess, why it's on people who actually care about Bitcoin succeeding to really be conscious of not just looking at this at a technical level, but also in terms of the perceptions. And anyway, I think Payjoin is a fantastic development in this regard, because it confers this plausible deniability to your activity. And another very interesting one in this regard is the multi-party ECDSA stuff. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting carried away.
No, not at all. I think there's nothing we did disagree on, as far as I can tell, at least.
So there's a question in the comments. Can somebody help me understand why a random RBF flag makes sense? I didn't get the point.
Yeah. So just the idea of blending into a crowd. Like if you have the general idea is, if your wallet has one specific behavior, such as a specific flag like RBF, then that can be a contributory part. So I think a lot of people probably heard of the concept of browser fingerprinting, right? The idea is like your browser gives away a bunch of data about, the version of Mozilla and the screen dimensions or something. I don't even know the details. And like cumulatively, a lot of little pieces of information together might make it very obvious, like who you are, so to speak. This is kind of similar. Maybe it's not the same. But if your wallet uses 4 or 5 different flags consistently in a certain way, it might be obvious that that's the same wallet. Whereas if you randomize some of those flags, you might make it very difficult to identify. In other words, from one spend to the next spend, one of them uses RBF and the next one doesn't. Then it might not be obvious that it's the same wallet. That's all.
Cool. And Mr. Cox has a question from YouTube regarding the script pub key type compatibility.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was asking earlier.
What do you think of the sender creating a disposable one hop to a correct type of the receiver and then using that to have correct fingerprint?
Disposable one hop. So, like, is he saying that somebody who's a sender in the Payjoin protocol might choose to create, like, just for the payment, create a different script pub key so that it matches the server? Is that what he means?
I don't know.
Max?
I think what he means is that if the sender proposes a legacy address or whatever fingerprint is, and the server only has native SegWit Bech32 address coins, then he spends a SegWit native coin, like a one input, one output transaction, where the output is a legacy address, and then he uses this unconfirmed transaction output in the Payjoin proposal. And then, at least for this individual Payjoin transaction, both inputs are with legacy addresses. Of course, if you look at the grander scheme of things, especially timing analysis, you would see that one of these addresses or one of these coins was done in this spontaneous self-spend.
Yeah, sorry, I slightly missed who's creating the one-time address in order to match up. Is the server doing that?
Server.
Or the server? I don't know. I mean, maybe. I think it's interesting thought, though. I'm not sure.
Okay. Any last questions? We should probably wrap up pretty soon.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from people on the call or YouTube?
A question for Adam. How far is the Payjoin integration in Join Market? And so what was the previous work and how is this now changed with the new proposal?
Yeah, so the previous work is something that happened, I guess, early 2019 or something, and then that just allowed 2 Join Market wallets to pay each other with a Payjoin. Same basic protocol, but just not over HTTP and no server, just 2 Join Market bots talking to each other over encrypted message channel. The new version is something, I think I explained this just before the call started, is a situation where in order to implement it, I had to kind of build it on some re-architected Bitcoin backend using a fork of Python Bitcoin lib, in fact. And so I built that in a branch in order to get PSBT functionality, which we now have in that branch. And also I put Snicker functionality in there, but it's kind of not really user exposed anyway. So that's kind of shelved for the moment. And but then I was able to build this new BTC Pay server Payjoin code in that branch. And that's I forgot to. I was going to screen share that as well, actually, but it doesn't matter. It's just one. It's pull request number 530 in Join Market, 536 in Join Market. And you'll see there that I've actually got to the point now where it's all finished on the command line. At least it's all finished. So I was able to like do experiments sending. And if there's anyone there who's kind of somewhat developer inclined and wants to help out, what they could do is they could install. They could use that pull request branch 536, and just make sure to install libsec p256k1 locally, because there's a technical installation issue there that's going to get resolved soon. Once that's resolved, it's a very complicated story, but my short version of the story is that can get merged probably in about a few weeks. The code is already functional, though. I've been testing it with mainnet anyway, so it's that's join market situation. Now, for receiving, we would probably have a similar situation to what Wasabi, what Lucas said earlier, is that we would probably like to just set it up so that a user can set up their own hidden service, ephemeral hidden service, just temporarily to receive a payment using the same protocol as BTC Pay server uses today, instead of this old method that we had, which is just completely like proprietary to join market. I think it would be nice if all the wallets that are currently implementing the sender side at least try to implement the receiver side using hidden services. It isn't necessarily that convenient for users to do that, but at least that's kind of very generic, and it should function for most people if they want to use it.
Alberto, how's it sound up?
Okay. Yes. Well, it's awesome. It's awesome to know that Join Market is going to have the receiver part, implement the receiver part, because let's say this. Payjoin basically it's when two people collude to fool a third one, right? There is a blockchain spy in this case, and in order to be able to do this, they need to communicate. Yeah, so there is where the endpoint parts come from, and so it is important. This works, but in order to make it work even more, we need wallets like Join Market, for example, that implement this the receiver part. Wallets that run on small devices, or wallets that for some reason needs to be on for a long time. I would like to implement this in Wasabi too. So because this is more real, it's distributed, it's a peer-to-peer way to introduce an enormous amount of confusion into the blockchain. So we need this. Of course, if the wallet runs for a long time, it's a good candidate to implement the receiver part. And if it is not, because it's just a mobile wallet, just implement the sender part. It's okay, and you are contributing a lot to the privacy. Just that.
Yeah. To be clear, we don't have any. I mean, I have like primitive server code, and I think we can do the onion receiver part, but we need to get the sender part in first. Get it into master and then in a release. So there's be a few weeks. Just wanted to mention, nothing much was mentioning BIP69, which I appreciate, because in a discussion with Nicholas Doria about this issue of how do we make sure Payjoins don't fingerprint, it made me realize that the fact that some wallets use BIP69 is actually problematic, very problematic for this. And not very is overstating it. The thing about BIP69 is it's basically ordering inputs and outputs lexicographically. So, like alphabetical, but with characters. So that's all very well and good because it's random and it's deterministic random. But the thing is, it's identifiable. And because it's identifiable, it's a fingerprint. And unless everyone was going to use BIP69, then the presence of BIP69 is a net negative for us trying to make transactions not stand out. So Nicholas Doria originally, and I'm not sure if it's still the case, had the intention to replicate BIP69 in the Payjoin transaction if he sees it in the original fallback transaction. And then I was saying, well, look, that's a problem because plenty of false positives, a randomly shuffled transaction, which is how a lot of wallets do it, including Join Market, can sometimes look like BIP69 just by accident. And then so if you replicate that, you're going to change the distribution. So these are the kind of nasty little details you get when you choose to add semantics into the transaction construction, which is not like intrinsically needed to be there. So I think I've been convinced by this discussion that BIP69 is an absolute like scourge on Bitcoin and should be eradicated at all costs.
Okay, I think we should probably wrap up
Yes,
unless anyone has any final questions. I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'll take the final question. So Snicket, Adam. What's the latest thoughts on Snicket?
On that? Yeah. So the latest on that is just like I was just saying earlier, is that now the back end refactoring is, I'm just thinking about it from Join Market's point of view because other people don't seem to be interested in implementing it right now. I'm just saying that I've put like the back end infrastructure in place for it. I actually now have all the cryptographic primitives. I even have a receiver script for it. But if I was to actually make it work, even just in the restricted case of using it with Join Market participants, it would kind of work really well because it would be easy to find the candidate transactions, but I have to either I or someone else would have to set up a hidden service or something and start scanning and then writing scanning code and writing proposal code. Bunch of work, and I haven't got any time to do that now. I would, if I had nothing else to do, I personally would do it because I think it's really interesting. But I think other people don't seem to have decided that it's sufficiently interesting to put a lot of like time and effort into building infrastructure for. So we'll see. I still think it's way better than people think, but I've been saying that for 2 years. So,
and you're more confident in it now. I mean, it's a few months on since the mailing list posts.
No, it's not that. I mean, oh right, that's true. Yeah, that was that like BIP draft. No, it's not. It's not that. It's just I didn't really change my mind about it. I just think it's one interesting like feather to put in your cap or whatever you call it, like another technique to add to something like Join Market, which is trying to be a multifaceted Bitcoin wallet as much as it can, or like it's focused on Coinjoin. I think it would be nice to add it there. Maybe some other wallets too. And in the long term, it could conceivably be something added to like mobile wallets, but there doesn't seem to be an appetite to do that right now. So, okay,
so let's wrap up. I'm not seeing any hands up. Thank you very much, Adam. That was amazing, very interesting. Thanks everyone for participating on the call. Thanks everyone on YouTube. We've got a few BTC Pay server people on the YouTube flirting with Nicholas Doria, even though Nicholas isn't here, I don't think. So yeah, thanks everyone for coming. There's a Lightning hack sprint this weekend that Jeff and Fulmo Lightning are organizing. So anybody who's interested in hacking on Lightning stuff, check that out this weekend. Follow Jeff on Twitter at Fulmo Lightning. Apart from that, thanks for coming. We'll have details on our next event soon. Thanks everyone.
Bye.
Thanks Adam.
Bye.